The courthouse steps gleamed wet under the October rain as Maya Chen clutched the manila envelope containing what she believed would save everything. 3 months of hell had led to this moment, standing outside Family Court Division 7, watching her mother-in-law, Victoria Pemberton, glide up the marble steps in her pearl gray suit, flanked by two attorneys whose hourly rates could fund a small country. Victoria's silver hair was pulled into that familiar severe bun, the same hairstyle she'd worn the day she first looked at Maya 22 years ago and declared her temporarily adequate for her precious son, David. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But Maya wasn't the broken woman Victoria expected to see crumbling on these courthouse steps. Not anymore. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her navy blazer borrowed from her sister, but her dark eyes held something Victoria hadn't counted on: the quiet fury of a mother who had discovered the truth. In Maya's purse, nestled next to her phone and car keys, was a micro SD card that contained 47 hours of footage Victoria never knew existed. Footage that would shatter the carefully constructed lies that had torn Maya's children from her arms and handed them to the woman who had orchestrated it all. Maya's fingers found the envelope's edge, feeling the weight of police reports, bank statements, and medical records that painted a picture so different from the one Victoria had presented to Judge Harrison 3 months ago. The rain intensified, drumming against the courthouse windows like an impatient heartbeat, but Maya remained still, watching as her former mother-in-law disappeared through the heavy oak doors, probably assuming this would be another easy victory in her campaign to erase Maya from her grandchildren's lives. What Victoria didn't know was that Maya had spent the last 96 days becoming someone entirely different. The woman who had once apologized for breathing too loudly during family dinners had learned to document, to investigate, to fight with the methodical precision of someone who had nothing left to lose except the two people who mattered most. 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Nathan had been living in Victoria's sprawling Beacon Hill mansion for 3 months, told by their grandmother that their mother was sick and needed time to get better, while Maya had been sleeping on her sister's couch, working 3 jobs, and spending every spare moment gathering the evidence that would bring them home. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Maya stepped into the marble foyer where her entire future would be decided. Today, Judge Harrison would hear Victoria's final petition for permanent custody, backed by testimony from 3 psychiatrists, 2 social workers, and a family friend who would swear under oath that Maya had been neglecting her children, drinking heavily, and creating an unsafe environment. Victoria had even produced medical records showing Maya's supposed visits to rehabilitation centers and psychiatric facilities. Documentation so thorough and convincing that Maya herself might have believed it if she hadn't known better. But Maya knew something Victoria didn't: that modern technology had a way of revealing truth even when people believed they were operating in shadows. The tiny cameras Maya had installed in her own home 6 months earlier, initially meant to monitor the babysitter, had captured something far more valuable than she could have imagined. They had recorded Victoria's visits during Maya's late shifts at the hospital, documented conversations between Victoria and David that revealed the scope of their plans, and most importantly, preserved evidence of the elaborate setup that had made Maya look like an unfit mother to Child Protective Services. Their families, their futures, their children. Maya could hear voices through the heavy timber, the low murmur of legal proceedings that would determine whether Emma and Nathan would grow up knowing their real mother or believing the fiction Victoria had so carefully constructed. She thought of Emma's laugh, the way it bubbled up from somewhere deep and genuine when Maya read her favorite book about the girl who could talk to butterflies. She thought of Nathan's habit of leaving handwritten notes under her pillow, misspelled declarations of love in red crayon that had sustained her through the darkest nights of the past 3 months. The receptionist's desk sat empty, the nameplate reading Mrs. Rodriguez, court click, reflecting the fluorescent lights overhead. Maya could see through the glass partition into Judge Harrison's chambers, where Victoria was already seated at the defendant's table, her legal team arranging stacks of documents with the confidence of people who had never lost a case like this. Victoria's son David sat beside her, his brown hair showing premature gray at 32, wearing the same defeated expression he'd carried since their divorce 2 years ago. He caught Maya's eye through the glass and looked away quickly, the guilt written across his features as clearly as if someone had tattooed it there. Maya remembered the man she'd married, the one who used to bring her coffee in bed and spent Saturday mornings teaching Emma to ride her bicycle in the park behind their Cambridge apartment. That David had disappeared gradually, worn down by his mother's constant criticism and his own inability to stand up to the woman who had controlled every major decision in his life since birth. The divorce had been painful, but necessary. A mutual acknowledgement that their marriage couldn't survive Victoria's interference and David's unwillingness to create boundaries. What Maya hadn't anticipated was Victoria's determination to remove her from Emma and Nathan's lives entirely, using the legal system as her weapon of choice. The courtroom filled slowly with the usual cast of characters that populated family court proceedings. There was Mrs. Patterson, the court reporter, adjusting her stenotype machine with the mechanical precision of someone who had captured thousands of life-changing moments in shorthand. Judge Harrison's bailiff, Officer Rodriguez, stood near the witness stand, his presence both reassuring and intimidating. Maya's own attorney, Sarah Kim, arrived carrying 2 banker's boxes and a laptop bag, her usually perfect black hair slightly disheveled from the rain. Sarah was young, maybe 28, but she had the kind of sharp intelligence that made opposing counsel underestimate her exactly once. Sarah set her materials down at the plaintiff's table and turned to Maya with the expression she'd learned to recognize over the past month. It was the look of someone delivering news that would either devastate you or save you, and you wouldn't know which until the words came out. "Maya," she said quietly, "I need you to understand something before we go in there. What we're about to present is going to change everything, not just for your case, but potentially for everyone involved. Are you prepared for that?" Maya nodded, thinking of the footage they'd watched together in Sarah's office just 2 days earlier. 47 hours of video had been condensed into a 23-minute compilation that told the story Victoria never wanted revealed. There was Victoria entering Maya's apartment with her own key, the one that David had given her for emergencies. There she was, methodically going through Maya's medicine cabinet, removing prescription bottles and replacing them with identical containers filled with different pills. The cameras had captured Victoria making phone calls to Child Protective Services, reporting concerns about Maya's mental state, and providing detailed descriptions of incidents that had never occurred. Most damaging of all was the footage from the night CPS had arrived to remove the children. Victoria had been there an hour early.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Heavily and neglecting her children's basic needs. The medical records looked official, the bank statements appeared authentic, and the witness testimonies were delivered with the kind of sincere concern that made them almost impossible to question. But Maya knew something Cross didn't, that every piece of evidence Victoria had so carefully constructed was about to be challenged by something far more powerful than official documents and sworn testimonies. The cameras in Maya's apartment had recorded not just Victoria's visits, but also the truth about Maya's daily life with her children. They showed bedtime stories and homework help, breakfast preparation, and careful attention to scraped knees and hurt feelings. They documented the reality Victoria had worked so hard to obscure, that Maya was exactly the kind of mother Emma and Nathan needed, and that their removal from her care had been based on lies so elaborate they required months of planning to execute. When Cross finished his opening statement, Judge Harrison turned to Sarah with the expression of someone who had heard similar stories countless times before. "Counsel for respondent, your opening statement." Sarah stood, and Maya could see something in her posture that suggested the next few minutes would change everything. "Your Honor, we are here today because of one of the most elaborate and calculating schemes this court has ever encountered. The evidence we will present will show that Mrs. Victoria Pemberton has systematically manipulated medical records, fabricated incidents of neglect, and orchestrated the removal of these children from their loving mother through a campaign of deception that spans several months. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning system and the distant sound of rain against the tall windows. Victoria's composed expression flickered for just a moment, and Maya saw something she'd never witnessed before: uncertainty in her former mother-in-law's eyes. Furthermore, Your Honor, Sarah continued, we have video evidence that documents not only Mrs. Pemberton's illegal entry into Ms. Chen's home, but also her deliberate planting of evidence, her falsification of scenes designed to suggest neglect, and her coordination with Child Protective Services to ensure they would find exactly what she wanted them to discover. This is not a case about an unfit mother, Your Honor. This is a case about an elaborate fraud designed to separate two children from the parent who loves them most. Hamilton Cross was on his feet before Sarah had finished speaking. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making accusations without foundation and attempting to poison the well before any evidence has been presented. Overruled, Judge Harrison said, his attention now fully focused on Sarah. Counsel, I assume you have evidence to support these rather serious allegations. Sarah reached into her briefcase and withdrew the manila envelope Maya had been carrying, along with a tablet computer and a portable projector. We do, Your Honor. We have 47 hours of security camera footage that documents every aspect of Mrs. Pemberton's scheme, along with supporting evidence that includes bank records, communication logs, and medical documentation that contradicts every claim made in the petition. Maya watched Victoria's face as the implications of Sarah's words settled over the courtroom. For the first time in the 3 months since this nightmare began, Victoria Pemberton looked like a woman who had miscalculated. Her silver hair remained perfectly styled, her pearl earrings caught the fluorescent light at precisely the right angle, but her hands were gripping the edge of the table with enough force to make her knuckles white. David leaned over to whisper something to his mother, his face pale and strained. Maya could see him processing what Sarah had just announced, understanding finally that his passive participation in his mother's scheme had been documented and preserved. The man who had once promised to protect Maya was about to face the consequences of choosing his mother's approval over his children's well-being. Your Honor, Sarah said, connecting the tablet to the portable projector, with the court's permission, we would like to present this evidence chronologically, beginning with Mrs. Pemberton's first documented entry into Ms. Chen's home 6 months ago. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he was prepared for whatever came next. Permission granted, Counselor. Let's see what you have. The lights dimmed slightly as the first image appeared on the white screen Sarah had set up near the jury box. It was Maya's living room, recognizable by the blue sofa Emma had helped pick out at the furniture store, and the bookshelf Nathan had organized by color rather than author. The timestamp showed a date 4 months before the children were removed, and Maya could see herself in the frame, reading to Emma and Nathan before bedtime, all 3 of them curled together on the couch. This footage was captured by security cameras Ms. Chen installed in her apartment for safety purposes, Sarah explained. What you're seeing is a typical evening in the Chen household 4 months before Mrs. Pemberton filed her petition. Please note the children's appearance, the condition of the home, and the quality of interaction between mother and children. The video continued for several minutes, showing Maya helping Nathan with his spelling homework while Emma practiced piano in the background. The apartment was clean and well organized, the children were clearly well cared for, and the interactions between them showed the kind of natural affection that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Maya watched herself on screen, remembering that particular evening when Emma had insisted on reading her favorite book aloud to everyone, including the stuffed elephant who served as Nathan's confidant and best friend. Now, Your Honor, Sarah said, advancing to the next clip. This is the same apartment 3 weeks later, but please note the timestamp indicates it was recorded during school hours, when Ms. Chen was at work at Massachusetts General Hospital. The screen showed Maya's living room again, but this time Victoria Pemberton was clearly visible entering through the front door. She moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there, carrying a small purse and what appeared to be a shopping bag from a local pharmacy. Victoria looked directly at one of the cameras, but her expression suggested she either didn't notice it or didn't understand what it was recording. Maya felt her throat tighten as she watched Victoria move through her home, opening cabinets and drawers with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting an inventory. Victoria examined family photos, looked through mail, and spent considerable time in Maya's bedroom, going through the medicine cabinet and dresser drawers. The footage captured everything in sharp detail, including Victoria removing prescription bottles and replacing them with identical containers that she pulled from her pharmacy bag. This footage documents Mrs. Pemberton's first systematic search of Ms. Chen's home, Sarah continued. Please note that she has a key and enters without permission during working hours when she knows the children are at school and Ms. Chen is at the hospital. We have similar footage from 8 additional dates over the following months, each visit becoming more elaborate and more calculated. Hamilton Cross was scribbling notes furiously, occasionally leaning over to whisper with his associate. Maya could see that Victoria's legal team had been caught completely off guard by the existence of video evidence. They had built their entire case on the assumption that Victoria's word, supported by carefully fabricated documentation, would be sufficient to convince Judge Harrison that Maya was an unfit mother.
Professional recording equipment. Together, Victoria and the stranger documented various aspects of Maya's apartment with particular attention to areas that could be made to look neglected or dangerous. They moved furniture, rearranged children's toys, and took photographs of normal household items from angles that made them appear problematic. Mrs. Pemberton has brought a professional photographer to document alleged neglect and safety hazards, Sarah explained. However, as you can see from our footage, they are actively manipulating scenes to create the appearance of problems that don't actually exist. The timestamp shows this occurred on a Thursday afternoon when Miss Chen was working a double shift at the hospital. Maya remembered that Thursday, a particularly difficult day when she'd covered for a colleague who'd called in sick. She had worked from 7 in the morning until nearly midnight, coming home exhausted, but still checking on Emma and Nathan, who were staying overnight at their father's apartment. She had never imagined that during those long hours at the hospital, Victoria was in her home with a professional photographer, creating evidence that would later be used to take her children away. The video continued with clips from Victoria's subsequent visits, each one more damaging than the last. There was footage of Victoria planting empty alcohol bottles in Maya's bedroom, scattering prescription medication on the kitchen counter, and deliberately damaging children's clothing to make it appear neglected. Most disturbing was the video from the night before Child Protective Services arrived, showing Victoria staging an elaborate scene designed to suggest Maya had been drinking heavily while caring for the children. This final clip, Sarah said, was recorded the evening before CPS removed Emma and Nathan from Ms. Chen's care. Please pay particular attention to what Mrs. Pemberton places throughout the apartment and how she arranges items to create maximum visual impact for the social workers who will arrive the following day. Maya watched Victoria work with the methodical precision of someone who had planned every detail. She positioned empty vodka bottles where they would be easily discovered, scattered pills that weren't Maya's prescriptions, invisible locations, and even went so far as to damage the children's school clothes and leave them in a pile near the front door. Victoria made phone calls during this visit, and while the audio wasn't clear enough to understand every word, her expressions and gestures suggested she was coordinating the timing of CPS's arrival. The courtroom had fallen completely silent, except for the soft whirring of the projector and the occasional scratch of pen on paper as Judge Harrison took notes. Victoria sat frozen in her chair, her carefully composed facade cracking like ice under pressure. David had gone pale, his hands clasped tightly in his lap, as he watched his mother's systematic destruction of his children's family play out in high definition on the courtroom screen. When the final video clip ended, Sarah turned off the projector and the courtroom lights returned to full brightness. The contrast was jarring, like waking from a vivid dream into harsh reality, except in this case, the dream had been Maya's nightmare and the reality was the evidence that would bring her children home. Your Honor, Sarah said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone presenting irrefutable truth. What we've just seen is not the behavior of a concerned grandmother trying to protect her grandchildren. This is the calculated campaign of a woman who decided to remove these children from their mother's care regardless of what was best for Emma and Nathan, and who was willing to commit fraud, break and enter, and perjure herself to achieve that goal. Hamilton Cross stood slowly, his usual courtroom confidence notably absent. Your Honor, we request a recess to review this new evidence and prepare our response. Judge Harrison looked at his watch, then at the two legal teams facing him across the mahogany rail that separated the court from
The gallery. Mr. Cross, did you and your client have any knowledge of the existence of this video evidence? No, Your Honor, we did not. Ms. Kim, when did your client first review this footage? Ms. Chen discovered the extent of Mrs. Pemberton's actions approximately 6 weeks ago, Your Honor. We have been working since that time to verify the authenticity of the recordings and compile the supporting documentation. Maya remembered the night she'd finally forced herself to review the security camera footage, hoping to find evidence that would support her case for getting the children back. She had expected to find proof of her good parenting, documentation of normal family life that would contradict Victoria's claims. What she'd discovered instead was a level of betrayal so systematic and calculated that she'd spent 3 hours sitting in her sister's kitchen, staring at the laptop screen in disbelief. Judge Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his experienced eyes moving from Victoria to David to Maya. This is indeed serious new evidence that requires careful consideration. However, given the nature of what we've just witnessed, I'm going to ask a few immediate questions before we proceed. He turned his attention to Victoria, whose composure had finally begun to crack under the weight of what had just been revealed. Mrs. Pemberton, do you recognize yourself in the footage we've just reviewed? Victoria's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she ignored him, raising her chin with the kind of defiant dignity Maya remembered from countless family dinners. Yes, Your Honor, that appears to be me. And do you dispute the authenticity of this video evidence? Victoria hesitated, her gray eyes darting between her attorney and the judge. Your Honor, I was acting in what I believe to be the best interests of my grandchildren. That wasn't my question, Mrs. Pemberton. Do you dispute that this footage accurately shows your actions and Miss Chen's apartment? No, Your Honor, I don't dispute the footage. Maya felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension she'd been carrying for 3 months finally beginning to unravel. Victoria's admission meant there would be no lengthy battle over the authenticity of the evidence, no expensive expert witnesses debating camera angles and digital enhancement. Victoria had just confirmed that everything Sarah had presented was accurate, that the video evidence showed exactly what it appeared to show. Judge Harrison turned his attention to David, who had been sitting in increasingly obvious distress as his mother's actions were revealed in detail. Mr. Pemberton, were you aware of your mother's activities as documented in this footage? David's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Not initially, Your Honor. I became aware that my mother was visiting Maya's apartment, but I didn't understand the scope of what she was doing until today. But you were aware she had access to your former wife's home. Yes, Your Honor, I gave her a key after the divorce in case there were emergencies with the children. Maya closed her eyes briefly, remembering the fight they'd had about that key. She had objected to Victoria having unlimited access to her home, but David had insisted it was necessary for the children's safety. Now she understood that Victoria's mother had been planning this betrayal even then, laying the groundwork for the systematic campaign that would eventually tear Emma and Nathan from her arms. Ms. Chen, Judge Harrison said, and Maya felt her attention snap back to the present moment. You installed these security cameras in your own home. What was your original purpose in doing so? Maya stood, her voice steadier than she had expected. Your Honor, I installed them 6 months ago after my babysitter mentioned that she sometimes heard noises in the hallway that made her uncomfortable. I wanted to ensure the apartment was secure when I was working late shifts at the hospital. And you had no knowledge of Mrs. Pemberton's visits until you reviewed this footage. I knew she occasionally stopped by to see the children. Children, Your Honor, but
I had no idea she was entering when we weren't home or that she was manipulating evidence to make me appear unfit. Judge Harrison made several notes on the legal pad in front of him, his pen scratching against paper in the quiet courtroom. Maya could see Victoria's hands trembling slightly as she waited for the judge's next question, her usual, unshakable confidence finally showing cracks under the pressure of having her deceptions exposed so completely. "Mr. Cross," Judge Harrison said, addressing Victoria's attorney, "in light of this new evidence, does your client wish to withdraw her petition for permanent custody?" Hamilton Cross conferred quietly with Victoria and Jennifer Walsh for several minutes, their heads bent together over legal documents and whispered conversations. Maya could see Victoria's hands shaking her head repeatedly, her jaw set in the stubborn line Maya recognized from years of family arguments. Even now, faced with irrefutable evidence of her elaborate deceptions, Victoria Pemberton was not prepared to admit defeat. "Your Honor," Cross said finally, "my client maintains that her actions, well, perhaps misguided, were motivated by genuine concern for her grandchildren's welfare. She wishes to continue with her petition and present evidence of Miss Chen's fitness as a parent." Maya felt a surge of disbelief at Victoria's continued obstinacy, but Sarah placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "She's making a mistake," Sarah whispered. "The video evidence is devastating enough, but if she continues to fight this, we have even more ammunition." Judge Harrison looked at Victoria with the expression of someone who had presided over family court long enough to recognize every type of human stubbornness and delusion. "Mrs. Pemberton, I want to be very clear about what this court has just witnessed. The footage shows you repeatedly entering Ms. Chen's home without her knowledge or consent, manipulating evidence, and staging scenes designed to make her appear neglectful. These actions potentially constitute breaking and entering, fraud, and conspiracy to deprive a parent of custody through false evidence." Victoria's chin lifted higher, her gray eyes defiant, even in the face of Judge Harrison's obvious disapproval. "Your Honor, I stand by my assessment that those children were not receiving adequate care." "Based on what evidence, Mrs. Pemberton? Because what I've seen this afternoon suggests the opposite, that Ms. Chen was providing excellent care for Emma and Nathan, and that you systematically created false evidence to suggest otherwise." Maya watched this exchange with fascination and growing hope. Judge Harrison was clearly not buying Victoria's claims of acting in the children's best interests, and his questions suggested he understood exactly what the video evidence meant. For the first time in 3 months, Maya allowed herself to believe that Emma and Nathan might actually come home. Sarah stood and addressed the court. "Your Honor, if Mrs. Pemberton wishes to continue with her petition, we are prepared to present additional evidence that further contradicts her claims about Ms. Chen's fitness as a parent." "What additional evidence?" Hamilton Cross asked, his voice sharp with the kind of concern that suggested he already knew this case was lost. Sarah smiled, the expression of someone who had been saving the best evidence for last. "Bank records showing that Mrs. Pemberton paid for the fabricated medical and psychological evaluations presented in her petition, communication logs documenting her coordination with individuals willing to provide false testimony about Ms. Chen's behavior, and medical records proving that Ms. Chen has never received treatment for substance abuse or the mental health issues described in Mrs. Pemberton's petition." The courtroom fell silent again as the implications of Sarah's words settled over everyone present. Victoria had not only manipulated evidence and staged scenes in Maya's apartment, she had also purchased false professional opinions and coordinated with people willing to lie under oath.
The scoop of her deception was so elaborate and systematic that it represented one of the most calculated attempts at custody fraud Judge Harrison had likely ever encountered. Maya thought about Emma and Nathan, probably sitting in Victoria's pristine living room at that very moment, perhaps wondering why their mother hadn't come to see them in so long. Victoria had told them Maya was getting better and would see them again when she was ready, creating the impression that Maya had abandoned them voluntarily. The children had no way of knowing that their mother had been fighting every single day to bring them home, that she had taken on extra shifts at the hospital to pay legal fees, and that she fell asleep every night looking at photos of them on her phone. Judge Harrison set his pen down and looked directly at Victoria. "Mrs. Pemberton, I'm going to ask you one final time. In light of the evidence presented by Miss Chen's counsel and considering the serious legal implications of what has been documented, do you wish to withdraw your petition?" Victoria looked at her attorneys, at her son, and finally at Maya. For a moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped completely, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. Maya saw, perhaps for the first time, that Victoria's actions had been driven not by concern for the children, but by her own terror of being displaced in their lives. Victoria had lost control of her son when he divorced Maya, and removing the children from Maya's care was her way of ensuring she remained the most important woman in their world. "No, Your Honor," Victoria said finally. "I do not wish to withdraw my petition." Maya felt Sarah's hand squeeze her arm as Judge Harrison's expression hardened into something that suggested Victoria Pemberton had just made the biggest mistake of her life. The judge reached for his gavel, and Maya knew that whatever came next would determine not just where Emma and Nathan lived, but whether Victoria would face criminal charges for the elaborate fraud she had just admitted to perpetrating. The rain continued to beat against the courthouse windows as Judge Harrison prepared to render a decision that would reshape two children's lives and hold their grandmother accountable for a betrayal so systematic it had taken months to uncover and document. Maya held her breath, 3 months of sleepless nights and desperate hope hanging in the balance as the gavel rose and fell with the weight of justice finally being served. The gavel struck the mahogany bench with a sound that seemed to echo through Maya's bones, but Judge Harrison's voice carried an authority that silenced even the whisper of rain against the courthouse windows. "This court is now in recess for 2 hours while I review the additional evidence presented by counsel. When we reconvene at 3 o'clock, I expect both parties to be prepared for my ruling on this matter." Maya watched Victoria rise from her chair with the mechanical stiffness of someone whose world had just shifted beneath her feet. The silver-haired woman who had orchestrated 3 months of calculated torment now moved like a person walking through thick water, her usual commanding presence reduced to something brittle and uncertain. Hamilton Cross gathered his papers with the efficiency of someone already calculating damage control, while Jennifer Walsh typed furiously on her laptop, probably researching precedents for cases involving custody fraud. Sarah collected her materials and turned to Maya with the expression of someone who had witnessed a legal earthquake. "We need to talk," she said quietly, "but not here. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks down where we can review what happens next." The November air bit sharp and clean after the stifling atmosphere of the courtroom, and Maya pulled her borrowed blazer tighter as they walked down Cambridge Street. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Linda. "How did it go? Kids asking about you." Maya's throat tightened as she thought about Emma and Nathan, probably having left
Victoria's formal dining room, unaware that their entire future was being decided 20 minutes away in a building they'd never seen. The coffee shop was nearly empty at 2 in the afternoon. Just a few graduate students hunched over laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. Sarah chose a corner booth away from potential eavesdroppers and spread several files across the scarred wooden table. Maya ordered black coffee she didn't want and sat across from the woman who had become her lifeline over the past month. "Maya," Sarah began, "what we just witnessed in that courtroom was extraordinary, but I need you to understand what comes next. Judge Harrison is going to rule in your favor. There's no question about that after what we presented. But Victoria's refusal to withdraw her petition means this is going to get much worse for her before it gets better." Maya wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug and looked at Sarah's serious expression. "What do you mean, worse?" The evidence we presented doesn't just prove Victoria manipulated your custody case, it demonstrates systematic fraud, breaking and entering, conspiracy to deprive you of parental rights, and possibly perjury if she testified falsely in previous proceedings. Judge Harrison is almost certainly going to refer this matter to the district attorney's office for criminal investigation. The implications of Sarah's words settled over Maya like a heavy blanket. Victoria Pemberton, the woman who had controlled every family gathering for 22 years, who had never faced consequences for her manipulations and emotional cruelty, was about to discover that the legal system took custody fraud very seriously. Maya felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction that Victoria would finally be held accountable. Sadness that Emma and Nathan would have to watch their grandmother face criminal charges. "There's something else," Sarah continued, pulling out a thick folder Maya hadn't seen before. "Remember when I told you we'd been investigating Victoria's claims about your medical and psychological history? We found something that's going to be very important when we go back into that courtroom." Sarah opened the folder to reveal bank statements, wire transfer records, and what appeared to be emails printed on legal letterhead. "Victoria didn't just plant evidence in your apartment, Maya. She paid for fabricated medical records, psychiatric evaluations, and witness testimony. We're talking about a conspiracy that involved at least 6 other people, including a doctor who lost his license in Connecticut for similar fraud." Maya stared at the documents, trying to process the scope of what Victoria had orchestrated. "How did you find all this?" "Detective work, mostly. When you told me about the security cameras, I hired a private investigator to look into Victoria's finances and communications. Dr. Marcus Webb, the psychiatrist who wrote the evaluation claiming you were suffering from severe depression and substance abuse issues, he's been under investigation by the state medical board for selling fraudulent diagnoses to people involved in custody disputes." Sarah pulled out another set of documents, these bearing the official seal of Massachusetts General Hospital. "Your real medical records show routine physical exams, vaccinations for the children, and treatment for a broken wrist you sustained last year. No history of substance abuse treatment, no psychiatric medications, no indication of any of the mental health issues Victoria claimed in her petition." Maya remembered the broken wrist, sustained when she'd slipped on ice while rushing to pick up Nathan from daycare during a snowstorm. She'd worked her shift at the hospital that night with a cast because missing work meant missing pay, and missing pay meant Emma and Nathan would have to go without something they needed. Victoria had used that injury somehow to suggest Maya was unstable and prone to accidents that endangered the children. "The bank records are particularly interesting," Sarah continued, pointing to highlighted lines. "Transactions. Victoria withdrew $43,000 in cash over the past 8 months. We've tracked payments to Dr. Webb, to the photographer who helped stage your apartment, and to 3 individuals who were prepared to testify about incidents they claimed to witness but that never actually occurred." Maya thought about Victoria's Beacon Hill mansion, the Persian rugs and crystal chandeliers that spoke of inherited wealth and careful investment. $43,000 was probably pocket change to Victoria, a small price to pay for removing the women she'd always seen as an inadequate mother for her precious grandchildren. What Victoria hadn't calculated was that modern technology and thorough investigation could unravel even the most carefully constructed lies. "There's more," Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "The private investigator found something else in Victoria's communications that's going to shock you. She's been planning this for over 2 years, Maya, since before your divorce from David was even finalized." Sarah pulled out printed emails that made Maya's blood run cold as she read them. Victoria had been corresponding with Hamilton Cross about custody strategies while Maya and David were still in marriage counseling, exploring legal options for gaining custody of Emma and Nathan based on claims that Maya was an unfit mother. The emails revealed a level of calculation and long-term planning that suggested Victoria had never intended to allow Maya to maintain custody of her children after the divorce. One email, dated 18 months earlier, was particularly damning. "Hamilton,
I need you to research the most effective strategies for documenting parental unfitness in Massachusetts family court. The mother in question works night shifts at a hospital, which should provide opportunities to demonstrate neglect. What type of evidence would be most persuasive to a family court judge? Maya felt sick as she read Victoria's methodical planning, the way she had reduced Emma and Nathan to chess pieces in a game Maya hadn't even known they were playing. Victoria had spent months researching legal strategies, identifying vulnerabilities in Maya's work schedule and living situation, and building a case based entirely on lies and manufactured evidence. The most disturbing part, Sarah said, is this email from 6 months ago, right around the time you installed the security cameras. Victoria wrote to Cross, "The apartment situation is perfect for our needs. I have access and can create the necessary documentation over the next several months. The mother's work schedule provides ample opportunity for evidence collection." Maya realized that Victoria's increased visits to her apartment, which she'd attributed to genuine concern for the children, had actually been reconnaissance missions. Victoria had been mapping out Maya's routines, identifying the best times to plant evidence, and planning the systematic campaign that would eventually convince Child Protective Services to remove Emma and Nathan from their mother's care. Why didn't she just fight for visitation rights? Maya asked, though she already knew the answer. Victoria Pemberton didn't do anything halfway, and sharing her grandchildren with a woman she'd never approved of was unacceptable. Victoria wanted complete control, wanted to be the primary female influence in Emma and Nathan's lives, wanted to erase Maya from their story entirely. Sarah checked her watch and began gathering the documents. "We need to get back to the courthouse. Judge Harrison is going to want to see all of this evidence, and I have a feeling he's going to have some very pointed questions for Mrs. Pemberton and her legal team." As they walked back through the cold afternoon air, Maya felt a strange sense of unreality about the entire situation. 3 months ago, she had been a single mother, working hard to provide for her children, believing that the legal system would protect her rights and keep her family together. Now she was walking back into a courtroom where her former mother-in-law was
To face the consequences of a fraud so elaborate, it had required months of planning and tens of thousands of dollars to execute. The courthouse lobby was busier now, filled with people waiting for afternoon sessions to begin. Maya spotted David sitting alone on one of the wooden benches, his head in his hands and his shoulders shaking slightly. For a moment, she felt a stab of sympathy for the man she'd once loved, who was watching his mother's actions destroy not just Maya's life, but potentially his own relationship with his children. Victoria was nowhere to be seen, probably huddled with her legal team in one of the small conference rooms, preparing for what Hamilton Cross must know would be a devastating afternoon. Maya wondered if Victoria understood yet that her elaborate scheme had backfired completely, that instead of gaining custody of Emma and Nathan, she had likely ensured that she would never see them again. The courtroom filled quickly as 3 o'clock approached. Maya noticed several new faces in the gallery, including a woman with a press badge who was taking notes, and a man in a suit who had the bearing of someone from the district attorney's office. Word was apparently spreading about the dramatic evidence that had been presented, and people were curious to see how Judge Harrison would handle such an obvious case of custody fraud. When Judge Harrison entered, the atmosphere in the courtroom felt different than it had that morning. There was an electricity in the air, the sense that everyone present was about to witness something extraordinary. Judge Harrison's expression was grim as he took his seat, and Maya could see that the 2 hours of recess had given him time to fully process the implications of what Sarah had presented. "This court is now back in session," Judge Harrison announced. "I have spent the recess reviewing the video evidence presented by counsel for the respondent, as well as additional documentation that has been provided. Before I render my decision on Mrs. Pemberton's petition for permanent custody, I have several questions that require immediate answers." Victoria sat rigidly in her chair, her silver hair still perfectly styled, but her face pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. Hamilton Cross looked like a man preparing for a professional catastrophe, while Jennifer Walsh was frantically taking notes as if documentation could somehow minimize the damage about to be done to their case. Mrs. Pemberton, Judge Harrison began, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The evidence presented this afternoon shows systematic fraud in your petition for custody. You have admitted that the video footage accurately depicts your actions. I am now going to ask you directly, did Dr. Marcus Webb $4,500 for a psychiatric evaluation of Ms. Chen that was based entirely on fabricated information? Victoria's attorney leaned over to whisper something, but she waved him away with an irritated gesture. Your Honor, I paid Dr. Webb for a professional consultation about my concerns regarding Ms. Chen's mental state. That's not what I asked, Mrs. Pemberton. Did Dr. Webb ever personally examine Ms. Chen, interview her, or review any legitimate medical records before writing his evaluation? The silence in the courtroom was so complete that Maya could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Victoria's hands were clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white, and she seemed to be struggling whether to continue lying or finally admit the truth. No, Your Honor, Victoria said finally. Dr. Webb based his evaluation on information I provided to him. Information that included fabricated incidents, staged evidence, and outright lies about Miss Chen's behavior and mental health. I believe the information I provided was accurate based on my observations. Judge Harrison's expression suggested he had reached the limit of his patience with Victoria's continued attempts to justify her actions. Mrs. Pemberton, your observations have been documented on video and
Show you systematically creating false evidence. This is not a matter of interpretation or concern for your grandchildren. This is fraud, and it appears to be criminal fraud. Maya watched Victoria's face as Judge Harrison's words hit home. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria seemed to understand that her actions had consequences that extended far beyond the family court system. The woman who had manipulated and controlled everyone around her for decades was finally facing a situation she couldn't talk her way out of or buy her way through. Miss Kim, Judge Harrison continued, turning to Sarah, please present the additional evidence you mentioned regarding Mrs. Pemberton's financial transactions and communications. Sarah stood and activated the projector again, this time displaying bank records and email correspondences that painted a picture of premeditation and conspiracy that extended far beyond what the security camera footage had revealed. The financial records showed not just payments to Dr. Webb, but also cash withdrawals that corresponded with visits from people who had been prepared to provide false testimony about Maya's fitness as a parent. Your Honor, Sarah said, these records demonstrate that Mrs. Pemberton's actions were not motivated by sudden concern for her grandchildren, but were part of a calculated plan that began over 2 years ago. She researched legal strategies, identified potential witnesses, and methodically built a case based entirely on fabricated evidence. The email correspondences were even more damaging than the financial records. Victoria's communications with Hamilton Cross revealed not just planning, but also her true motivations for seeking custody. In one particularly revealing exchange, Victoria had written, "These children deserve better than a mother who works night shifts and can't provide the cultural and educational advantages they would receive in my home. Maya has always been beneath our family standards, and I won't allow her inadequacies to limit Emma and Nathan's potential." Maya felt a familiar stab of pain at Victoria's casual cruelty, the way she reduced Maya's hard work and devotion to her children to mere inadequacy. Victoria had never seen Maya as a person deserving of respect or consideration, only as an obstacle to be removed from her grandchildren's lives. The elaborate fraud wasn't about protecting Emma and Nathan. It was about Victoria's need to control every aspect of their upbringing. Judge Harrison reviewed the documents in silence for several minutes, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. When he finally looked up, his expression was one of complete disgust. "Mrs. Pemberton, In 32 years on the family court bench, I have never encountered such a systematic and calculated attempt to defraud the court system and deprive a parent of custody through manufactured evidence. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. Your Honor, I only wanted what was best for my grandchildren. Maya comes from nothing. She has no family connections, no resources to give them the advantages they deserve. They belong with people who can provide for them properly. Mrs. Pemberton, what those children deserve is to be with their mother, who has demonstrated nothing but love and competent care for them. What they don't deserve is to be pawns in your campaign of fraud and manipulation. Judge Harrison reached for a different set of papers, and Maya could see that his decision had been made. The petition for permanent custody filed by Victoria Pemberton is hereby denied in its entirety. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate return of Emma Chen Pemberton and Nathan Chen Pemberton to their mother's custody, effective immediately. Maya felt tears she'd been holding back for 3 months finally spill over as Judge Harrison's words sank in. Emma and Nathan were coming home. After 96 days of sleeping on her sister's couch, working extra shifts to pay legal fees, and falling asleep looking at photos on her phone, her children were finally coming home.
Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Mrs. Pemberton, I am also ordering that you have no contact with Emma and Nathan pending the outcome of a criminal investigation into your actions. The evidence presented today will be forwarded to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential charges, including fraud, conspiracy, breaking and entering, and perjury. Victoria stood up so abruptly that her chair scraped against the floor. Your Honor, you can't keep me from my grandchildren. I'm the only stable family they have. Mrs. Pemberton, you have demonstrated that you are willing to lie, cheat, and commit fraud to get what you want. You have shown a complete disregard for these children's well-being and their relationship with their mother. You are exactly the kind of person these children need protection from. Hamilton Cross was on his feet, trying to salvage something from the complete destruction of his case. Your Honor, my client's actions, while misguided, were motivated by genuine concern. Surely some form of supervised visitation could be arranged? Counselor, your client's actions were not misguided. They were criminal. She orchestrated an elaborate fraud that separated 2 children from their loving mother for 3 months. There will be no visitation, supervised or otherwise, until the criminal matter is resolved. Maya watched Victoria sink back into her chair, the reality of her situation finally penetrating the wall of entitlement and self-righteousness she'd built around herself. The woman who had controlled every family decision for decades, who had manipulated and intimidated everyone around her into compliance, was finally facing consequences she couldn't buy or bully her way out of. David stood up from his seat behind Victoria, his face ashen. Your Honor, what about my parental rights? I had no knowledge of the extent of my mother's actions. Judge Harrison looked at David with an expression that suggested he held him partially responsible for enabling Victoria's behavior. Mr. Pemberton, while you may not have known the full scope of your mother's fraud, you gave her the keys and access that made it possible. Your visitation rights will be reviewed separately, but I strongly suggest you consider whether your relationship with your mother is more important than your relationship with your children. The bailiff was already moving toward Victoria with papers that Maya assumed were related to the criminal investigation Judge Harrison had just ordered. Victoria looked around the courtroom as if searching for someone who might rescue her from the consequences of her own actions. But her legal team was busy gathering documents, and her son was staring at the floor in apparent shame. Sarah leaned over to Maya and whispered, "It's over. Emma and Nathan can come home tonight." Maya felt a sob of relief escape her throat as the full impact of Judge Harrison's ruling hit her. 3 months of hell were finally ending. 3 months of wondering if she would ever hold her children again, of working herself to exhaustion trying to pay legal fees, of falling asleep every night wondering what Victoria was telling Emma and Nathan about why their mother had abandoned them. "Ms. Chen," Judge Harrison said, and Maya stood on shaking legs. "Child Protective Services will coordinate with you to arrange the immediate return of your children. I want to apologize on behalf of this court system for what you and your children have endured. The fraud perpetrated against you and this court was elaborate and convincing, and I commend you for gathering the evidence necessary to expose the truth." Maya could barely speak through her tears. "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for bringing my children home."
As the courtroom began to empty, Maya saw the woman with the press badge approach Hamilton Cross, probably hoping for a comment about the spectacular collapse of his client's case. The man from the district attorney's office was speaking quietly with Officer Rodriguez, apparently arranging for the transfer of evidence for criminal prosecution.
Victoria remained seated at the defendant's table, staring straight ahead with the expression of someone whose world had just imploded. The woman who had orchestrated months of fraud and manipulation now faced the possibility of criminal charges, the loss of her grandchildren, and the destruction of her carefully constructed reputation in Boston's social circles. Maya walked past Victoria's table on her way out of the courtroom, and for a moment their eyes met. Victoria's gaze held no apology, no recognition of the pain she had caused, only the cold fury of someone whose plans had been thwarted. Even now, facing criminal investigation and the loss of everything she tried to gain, Victoria Pemberton remained convinced that she had been justified in her actions. Outside the courthouse, Maya stood on the wet steps and called her sister. "Linda, it's over! The judge ruled in my favor! Emma and Nathan are coming home today!" Linda's scream of joy was so loud that Sarah, standing nearby, could hear it through the phone. "Oh my God, Maya, I can't believe it's finally over. The kids are going to be so happy. They ask about you every day." Maya wiped tears from her cheeks as she realized that in just a few hours, she would be holding Emma and Nathan again, reading bedtime stories and helping with homework and arguing about vegetables at dinner time. All the normal, beautiful chaos of being a mother was about to return to her life. Sarah touched her arm gently. "Maya, there's going to be a lot of media attention about this case. Victoria's fraud was so elaborate that it's going to make news, especially with the criminal investigation. Are you prepared for that?" Maya thought about the reporters who would want to interview her, the lawyers who would analyze the case on television, the social media posts that would discuss Victoria's spectacular downfall. None of it mattered compared to the fact that Emma and Nathan were coming home. "I just want my children back," Maya said. "Everything else is just noise." As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 months: hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope that had sustained her through the darkest moments of the custody battle, but the solid, grounded hope of someone whose nightmare was finally ending. Victoria's elaborate fraud had been exposed, Judge Harrison had seen through the lies and manipulation, and most importantly, Emma and Nathan would be sleeping in their own beds tonight. The rain had stopped while they were in court, and pale November sunlight was breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. Maya took it as a sign that the worst was finally behind them, that the storm Victoria had created in their lives was beginning to clear. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, helping Emma and Nathan process what had happened, dealing with the media attention, watching Victoria face criminal charges. But tonight would be about the simple joy of being a family again. Maya climbed into Sarah's car and looked back at the courthouse one last time. Somewhere inside that building, Victoria Pemberton was probably still sitting at the defendant's table, trying to understand how her perfectly planned scheme had unraveled so completely. Maya felt no satisfaction in Victoria's downfall, only profound relief that the nightmare was over and her children were finally coming home where they belonged. The Child Protective Services office on Tremont Street buzzed with the controlled chaos of social workers managing dozens of cases. But for Maya Chen, standing in the waiting area with a plastic bag containing Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit and Nathan's collection of superhero figurines, it felt like the most important place on earth. Sarah Kim sat beside her, occasionally checking her phone for updates from the courthouse, while across the room, a CPS supervisor named Janet Morrison reviewed paperwork that would officially return Emma and Nathan to their mother's custody. Maya's hands trembled slightly as she held the bag of toys, remembering the night
Months ago, when the same office had taken her children away. That evening, she had been caught completely off guard, standing in her apartment doorway while strangers explained that reports of neglect required Emma and Nathan's immediate removal. She had watched helplessly as Nathan cried for his mother, and Emma tried to comfort her younger brother, both children confused and frightened by the sudden upheaval of their world. Now, as afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the CPS office, Maya was about to reverse that nightmare. Judge Harrison's order was clear and immediate.
Emma and Nathan were to be returned to their mother's care without delay, and Victoria Pemberton was to have no contact with the children pending criminal investigation. The fraud that had torn their family apart was finally being undone, one official signature at a time. Janet Morrison approached with a warm smile and a manila folder thick with documents. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who had overseen countless family reunifications, both joyful and heartbreaking. "Ms. Chen," she said, extending her hand, "I want to personally apologize for what your family has endured. The evidence presented in court today shows that our intervention was based on completely fabricated reports." Maya shook Janet's hand, feeling a complex mixture of emotions toward the woman and the agency that had separated her from her children. She understood that CPS workers were trying to protect children from genuine harm, but the system's vulnerability to manipulation had allowed Victoria to weaponize it against Maya's family. "I don't blame you," Maya said quietly. "Victoria's lies were very convincing." "They were more than convincing," Janet replied, opening the folder to reveal copies of the reports that had triggered the original investigation. Mrs. Pemberton provided detailed documentation, photographs, and witness statements that painted a disturbing picture of neglect and endangerment. "Our social workers are trained to respond quickly when children appear to be at risk, and everything we were shown suggested immediate intervention was necessary." Maya looked at the fabricated reports, recognizing some of the photographs Victoria had staged during her secret visits to the apartment. The woman had been meticulous in her deception, creating a paper trail that would have convinced any reasonable person that Emma and Nathan were living in dangerous conditions. Victoria had even included medical records showing that Maya had been treated for substance abuse and mental health issues that never existed. "The children are being transported here from Mrs. Pemberton's residence. They should arrive within the next 30 minutes. I need you to understand that Emma and Nathan have been told their grandmother was caring for them while you were getting better, so they may be confused about why the arrangement is ending suddenly." Maya's heart clenched at the thought of her children spending 3 months believing their mother had abandoned them voluntarily. Victoria had poisoned their understanding of the situation, making herself appear as their rescuer while painting Maya as someone too unstable to care for them. Undoing that psychological damage would require time, patience, and probably therapy to help Emma and Nathan process what had really happened. Sarah touched Maya's arm gently. "Remember what we discussed about explaining this to them. Keep it simple, age-appropriate, and focused on the fact that you never stopped fighting to bring them home." Maya nodded, having rehearsed various ways to explain the situation to 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Nathan, without traumatizing them further. The truth was too complex and disturbing for children to understand fully, that their grandmother had orchestrated an elaborate fraud to steal them from their mother, but they deserved to know that Maya had never given up on them. The waiting area fell quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights.
The distant sound of phones ringing in social workers' offices. Maya tried to imagine how Emma and Nathan were feeling at that moment, probably confused about why they were being taken from Victoria's house and brought to yet another unfamiliar place. They had already endured too much upheaval for children their age, and Maya was determined to provide the stability and consistency they needed to heal from their grandmother's manipulation. At 4:15, Maya heard car doors slamming in the parking lot outside, followed by the sound of children's voices in the hallway. Her heart began racing as she recognized Emma's laugh and Nathan's higher-pitched chatter, the familiar sounds of her children that she had missed desperately for 3 months. She stood up, smoothing her borrowed blazer and trying to prepare herself for a reunion she had dreamed about every night since they were taken away. The office door opened, and Emma appeared first, her dark hair longer than Maya remembered, and her school uniform indicating she had come directly from Beacon Hill Academy, the expensive private school Victoria had enrolled her in. Emma's eyes swept the room, landed on Maya, and for a moment her expression showed confusion before recognition and joy flooded her features.
"Mom!" Emma cried, running across the room and throwing herself into Maya's arms with the force of 3 months' worth of missed hugs. Maya felt her daughter's solid warmth against her chest and had to fight back tears as she held Emma close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair and feeling the reality of having her child back in her arms. Nathan appeared in the doorway more cautiously, his 6-year-old face serious and uncertain. He was wearing clothes Maya didn't recognize, expensive khakis and a button-down shirt that looked like something Victoria would choose, and he seemed smaller somehow, as if the past 3 months had made him more guarded and careful about showing emotion. "Nathan," Maya said softly, still holding Emma but extending one arm toward her son. "Come here, sweetheart." Nathan approached slowly, his eyes searching Maya's face as if trying to determine whether this reunion was real or temporary. When he finally allowed himself to be pulled into the embrace, Maya felt complete for the first time in 3 months. Both children were here, both were healthy and safe, and they were going home together. "Are we going back to Grandma Victoria's house?" Emma asked, her voice muffled against Maya's shoulder. "She said you were sick and needed to get better before we could see you." Maya exchanged a glance with Sarah before answering carefully. "No, sweetheart. We're going home to our apartment. I was never sick, and I've been working very hard to bring you both back. Grandma Victoria made some mistakes, and now we get to be together again." Nathan pulled back to look at his mother's face, his expression skeptical in the way that only 6-year-olds could manage. "But Grandma Victoria said you didn't want to take care of us anymore because we were too much trouble." Maya felt a surge of anger at Victoria's psychological manipulation of her children, but she kept her voice calm and reassuring. "Nathan, that's not true at all. You and Emma are the most important things in my whole world, and I never stopped wanting to take care of you. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes or say things that aren't true, but I want you to know that I love you both more than anything." Janet Morrison approached with discharge papers and a gentle smile. "Emma, Nathan, your mom has been working very hard to bring you home. Sometimes the court system has to make sure children are safe, and now we know that the safest place for you is with your mother." Emma looked between Maya and Janet with the serious expression of a child trying to understand adult complexities beyond her years. "Are we going to live with Mom forever now? Or might we have to go back to Grandma Victoria's house?" "You're going to live with me forever," Maya said firmly. "No one is going to take you away from me."
Again, the drive back to Cambridge felt surreal, with Emma and Nathan chattering in the back seat about their experiences at Victoria's house, while Maya tried to process how much they had changed in 3 months. Emma had developed a more sophisticated vocabulary and mentioned activities like violin lessons and French tutoring that Victoria had enrolled her in. Nathan talked about the big library in Victoria's house and how the housekeeper had made them elaborate lunches that he photographed with an iPad Victoria had given him. Maya realized that Victoria had used the 3 months not just to keep the children away from their mother, but to demonstrate all the advantages she could provide that Maya couldn't afford. Private school, music lessons, expensive toys, and cultural experiences designed to make Maya's modest apartment and working-class lifestyle seem inadequate by comparison. Victoria had been building a case not just with fabricated evidence, but with the children themselves, showing them a lifestyle that might make them prefer living with their grandmother. The apartment building on Prospect Street looked exactly as Maya had left it 3 months ago, but walking up the familiar stairs with Emma and Nathan felt like entering a completely different life. Sarah had arranged for a cleaning service to prepare the apartment, and Maya's sister Linda had stocked the refrigerator with groceries and left flowers on the kitchen table with a note that read, "Welcome home." Emma and Nathan explored their rooms tentatively, as if they were visiting a place they half remembered from a dream. Their toys and books were exactly where they had left them, but 3 months was a long time in the life of a child, and Maya could see them trying to reconcile their memories of home with the luxury they had experienced at Victoria's mansion. "Can I call Grandma Victoria to tell her we're okay?" Emma asked, standing in the doorway of her bedroom with her arms wrapped around the stuffed rabbit Maya had brought from the CPS office. Maya knelt down to Emma's eye level, choosing her words carefully. "Grandma Victoria knows where you are, sweetheart, but she's dealing with some grown-up problems right now, so we won't be talking to her for a while.
but you can tell me anything you want to say to her, and we can write it down in a letter if that would help." Nathan appeared with his collection of superhero figurines, setting them up on his desk in the same formation he had used before CPS took them away. "Grandma Victoria said you might not be able to take care of us properly because you have to work so much. Is that true, Mom?" Maya sat on Nathan's bed and pulled both children close to her. "Nathan, I do work hard because that's how I take care of you and Emma. I work at the hospital helping people who are sick, and that's important work that helps our family have everything we need. Working hard doesn't mean I can't take care of you. It means I love you enough to do whatever it takes to give you a good life." Emma leaned against Maya's shoulder. "Grandma Victoria's house was really big, and she had people who cooked for us and cleaned everything. But I missed our apartment because it smells like you and it feels like home." Maya felt tears threatening again at Emma's simple wisdom. Victoria's mansion could provide material advantages that Maya couldn't match, but it couldn't replicate the warmth and love that defined their real home. The children had been surrounded by luxury for 3 months, but they had missed the irreplaceable comfort of being with the person who loved them most. As evening approached, Maya began the familiar routines that had anchored their family life before Victoria's interference. She helped Nathan with homework he had brought from his new school, listened to Emma practice reading from a book that was more advanced than anything she had been reading 3 months ago, and prepared dinner using ingredients Linda had thoughtfully provided. The children ate carefully, still adjusting to being back in their familiar environment after months of formal dining.
Victoria's house, Maya found herself studying their faces, looking for signs of how Victoria's manipulation had affected them psychologically. Emma seemed more serious than she had been before, occasionally asking questions about why certain things had happened. Nathan appeared more clingy, frequently checking to make sure Maya was still in the room and asking for reassurance that they weren't going anywhere. After dinner, while Emma and Nathan watched television in the living room, Maya's phone rang with a call from Detective Michael Santos of the Cambridge Police Department. Sarah had warned her that the criminal investigation would begin immediately, and Detective Santos needed to schedule interviews with Maya and the children about their experiences during the custody dispute. "Miss Chen," Detective Santos said, "I've reviewed the evidence from today's court proceedings, and I need you to understand that we're treating this as a serious criminal matter. Mrs. Pemberton's actions constitute multiple felonies, including fraud, conspiracy, and potentially kidnapping under Massachusetts law." Maya stepped into the kitchen to take the call privately, not wanting Emma and Nathan to overhear discussions about criminal charges against their grandmother. "Detective, I appreciate that you're investigating this, but my main concern is protecting my children from any additional trauma. They've been through enough already." "I understand completely," Detective Santos replied. "We'll arrange child psychologists to conduct any necessary interviews, and we'll be as gentle as possible. But I need you to know that Mrs. Pemberton's fraud was so extensive that it's likely to result in multiple felony charges. The bank records alone show conspiracy and fraud that could result in significant prison time." Maya processed the implications of Detective Santos's words. Victoria Pemberton, the woman who had controlled Maya's life for 22 years, who had manipulated and intimidated everyone around her with impunity, was finally going to face real consequences for her actions. The elaborate fraud that had torn Emma and Nathan from their mother's arms was about to result in criminal charges that could send Victoria to prison. "There's something else you should know," Detective Santos continued. "We executed a search warrant at Mrs. Pemberton's residence this afternoon and found additional evidence of her planning. She kept detailed files on your family, including photographs, financial records, and what appears to be a timeline for implementing her custody strategy." Maya felt sick at the thought of Victoria maintaining surveillance files on her family, documenting their lives for months or years in preparation for her elaborate scheme. The level of premeditation and calculation involved in Victoria's actions was staggering, suggesting a woman whose need for control had evolved into something genuinely dangerous. After ending the call with Detective Santos, Maya returned to the living room where Emma and Nathan were arguing quietly about which television show to watch. The normalcy of their sibling disagreement was so precious after 3 months of separation that Maya almost cried with relief. These were the moments Victoria had stolen from them, the ordinary, everyday interactions that defined their family life. As bedtime approached, both children became anxious about the routine.
asking multiple questions about whether Maya would be there in the morning and whether anyone was going to take them away again. Maya spent extra time with each of them, reading stories and providing reassurance that their nightmare was finally over. "Mom," Emma said, as Maya tucked her into bed, "why did Grandma Victoria tell us you were sick when you weren't?" Maya chose her words carefully, wanting to be honest without burdening Emma with the full complexity of what had happened. Sometimes people make bad choices because they want something very much, even when they know it's wrong. Grandma Victoria wanted you and Nathan to live with her, so she told lies to make that happen. It was
Wrong, and that's why you're back home with me now. Nathan called from his room, asking Maya to check his closet for monsters, a ritual they had shared since he was 4 years old. As Maya performed the familiar monster-checking routine, she realized how much she had missed these small intimacies of parenting. Victoria's fraud had stolen not just custody, but countless bedtime stories, scraped knee comfortings, and homework celebrations that could never be recovered. Later that evening, after both children were asleep, Maya sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to process everything that had happened. Her phone buzzed with text messages from friends, colleagues, and family members who had heard about the court ruling. Linda had sent a dozen heart emojis and a message reading, "I'm so proud of you for never giving up." Dr. Patricia Wells, Maya's supervisor at the hospital, wrote, "Take all the time you need to get your family settled. Your job will be here when you're ready." Maya's laptop chimed with an email from Sarah Kim containing links to several news articles about the custody fraud case. The story was already gaining attention from local media, with headlines like "Elaborate Custody Fraud Exposed in Family Court" and "Grandmother's Scheme to Steal Grandchildren Backfires Spectacularly." Maya read the articles with fascination, seeing her story transformed into legal precedent and public interest journalism. One article quoted family law experts discussing the implications of Victoria's fraud for future custody cases. Professor Diana Rodriguez of Suffolk University Law School was quoted saying, "This case demonstrates the vulnerability of our family court system to sophisticated manipulation. Mrs. Pemberton's scheme was so elaborate and well documented that it fooled experienced social workers and nearly succeeded in permanently separating children from their loving mother." Maya realized that her family's nightmare was becoming a cautionary tale that might help protect other families from similar manipulation. Victoria's spectacular downfall would serve as a warning to anyone else who might consider using fraud to manipulate custody decisions. The security camera footage that had saved Emma and Nathan might also save other children from being torn away from parents who love them. Around midnight, Maya received an unexpected phone call from David Pemberton. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity about what her ex-husband might say after witnessing his mother's complete legal destruction convinced her to pick up. "Maya," David's voice was quiet and strained, "I need you to know that I had no idea how far my mother had gone. I knew she was visiting your apartment, but I thought she was just checking on the kids." Maya felt a familiar surge of frustration at David's willful blindness to his mother's manipulations. "David, your mother spent $43,000 orchestrating this fraud. She paid for fake medical records, hired people to lie about me, and systematically destroyed evidence of her own crimes. You really expect me to believe you didn't know anything?" "I know how it looks," David said, "but I swear to you, I didn't understand what she was doing until I saw that footage today. I thought she was just concerned about Emma and Nathan's welfare." Maya realized that David's denial was probably genuine, not because he was innocent, but because he had spent his entire life avoiding uncomfortable truths about his mother's behavior. David had perfected the art of looking away when Victoria manipulated situations to get what she wanted, and this custody fraud was simply the ultimate expression of patterns he had been ignoring for decades. "David, your mother told Emma and Nathan that I didn't want them anymore. She convinced them that I was too sick and unstable to care for them. She stole 3 months of their childhood and made them believe their mother had abandoned them. That's what your willful blindness enabled." David was quiet for a long moment before responding. "Maya, I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'm going to testify against my mother in the criminal case. The prosecutors contacted me this afternoon, and I'm going to tell them everything I know about her planning and her access to your apartment." Maya felt surprised by David's declaration, though she realized it might be motivated more by self-preservation than genuine remorse. David probably understood that his passive participation in Victoria's scheme made him legally vulnerable, and cooperating with prosecutors might be his best strategy for avoiding criminal charges himself. "What about your relationship with Emma and Nathan?" Maya asked. "Judge Harrison said your visitation rights would be reviewed separately." "I don't know," David admitted. "I need to figure out how to be their father without my mother's interference. I've never done that before, and I'm not sure I know how." Maya hung up feeling a complex mixture of pity and anger toward the man she had once loved. David was finally being forced to confront the reality of his mother's controlling behavior. But it had taken the complete destruction of his children's family to make him acknowledge what Maya had been trying to tell him for years. The next morning brought a return to routines that felt both familiar and strange. Emma and Nathan ate breakfast at their small kitchen table instead of Victoria's formal dining room, packed simple lunches instead of elaborate meals prepared by household staff, and walked to their neighborhood school instead of being driven to Beacon Hill Academy in Victoria's luxury sedan. Maya had taken a leave of absence from the hospital to help Emma and Nathan readjust to their normal life, and she spent the morning at their school meeting with guidance counselors and teachers who needed to understand what the children had experienced. The principal, Mrs. Elizabeth Harper, was sympathetic and professional, arranging for additional support services to help Emma and Nathan process their recent trauma. "Miss Chen," Mrs. Harper said, "we want to make sure Emma and Nathan feel completely secure here. We understand they've been through an extraordinarily difficult experience, and we're prepared to provide whatever accommodations they need to succeed academically and emotionally." Maya appreciated the school's supportive response, but she could see that Emma and Nathan were struggling with the transition back to their regular environment. Emma seemed overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of public school after 3 months in small, quiet classes at Beacon Hill Academy. Nathan appeared anxious about being separated from Maya, frequently asking teachers if he could call his mother to make sure she was still at home. That afternoon, Maya received a call from Dr. Jennifer Martinez, a child psychologist who specialized in helping families recover from custody disputes and parental alienation. Detective Santos had recommended Dr. Martinez as someone who could help Emma and Nathan process their experiences while also documenting any psychological damage for the criminal case against Victoria. "Miss Chen," Dr. Martinez said, "I've reviewed the case materials, and I want you to understand that what your children experienced constitutes psychological abuse. Mrs. Pemberton deliberately manipulated their understanding of your relationship and their family situation. Recovery is absolutely possible, but it will require time and therapeutic intervention." Maya scheduled appointments for Emma and Nathan to begin therapy the following week, understanding that healing from Victoria's manipulation would be a process rather than an immediate resolution. The children needed professional help to understand what had happened to them and to rebuild their trust in the stability of their family life.
Become accustomed to having household staff anticipate his needs and seemed frustrated by having to do age-appropriate chores like putting away his toys. More concerning were the subtle ways Victoria had undermined Maya's authority and parenting decisions. Emma mentioned that Victoria had told her she was, quote, too smart for public school and deserved better educational opportunities. Nathan reported that Victoria had said Maya's work schedule proved she didn't prioritize her children properly. These toxic messages would require patient correction and therapeutic intervention to undo. 2 weeks after the court ruling, Maya received a call from Assistant District Attorney Rachel Kowalski, who was prosecuting Victoria's criminal case. The investigation had uncovered additional evidence of Victoria's fraud, including communications with other divorced parents interested in hiring her custody consultant services to manipulate family court proceedings. "Miss Chen," ADA Kowalski said, "we're charging Mrs. Pemberton with conspiracy, fraud, breaking and entering, and child endangerment.
The evidence is overwhelming, and we expect her to plead guilty rather than face trial. She's looking at significant prison time, probably 3 to 5 years. Maya felt conflicted about Victoria facing prison time, not out of sympathy for her former mother-in-law, but because Emma and Nathan would have to process the reality that their grandmother was a convicted criminal. The children were already struggling to understand why they couldn't see Victoria anymore, and explaining that she was in prison would add another layer of complexity to their recovery. "There's something else," ADA Kowalski continued. "Mrs. Pemberton's scheme was apparently more extensive than we initially realized. We've identified at least 3 other families where she provided consulting services to parents trying to gain custody through fraudulent means. This wasn't just about your family. It was potentially a business model for her." Maya realized that Victoria's manipulation of her custody case had been a beta test for a broader criminal enterprise. The woman who had spent decades controlling her own family had apparently decided to monetize her manipulative skills by helping other wealthy parents steal children from spouses they deemed inadequate. The scope of Victoria's criminal behavior was staggering and went far beyond personal vendetta into systematic fraud. A month after Emma and Nathan's return, Maya attended Victoria's arraignment at Suffolk County Superior Court. She had debated whether to go, but Detective Santos had suggested that seeing Victoria held accountable might provide psychological closure for Maya and potentially helpful evidence for the children's therapy. Victoria appeared in the defendant's dock wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual designer clothing. Her silver hair pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than her characteristic severe bun. The transformation was striking. The woman who had controlled every detail of her appearance and environment for decades now looked like exactly what she was, a criminal defendant facing serious felony charges. Judge Patricia Williams read the charges against Victoria in a clear, formal voice that stripped away any ambiguity about the seriousness of her crimes. "Mrs. Victoria Pemberton, you are charged with conspiracy in the first degree, fraud in the first degree, breaking and entering, child endangerment, and perjury. How do you plead?" Victoria's new attorney, a public defender named Maya Chen, who had replaced the expensive legal team that had abandoned her after the family court debacle, stood with his client as she entered her plea. "Not guilty, Your Honor."
The arraignment, Maya stood on the courthouse steps and realized that her family's nightmare was finally transforming into something resembling justice. Victoria would face criminal consequences for her elaborate fraud. Emma and Nathan were home and beginning to heal, and Maya had learned something important about her own strength and resilience. The legal proceedings would continue for months, with depositions, plea negotiations, and eventually either a trial or a sentencing hearing. Victoria's civil assets would likely be seized to pay restitution to Maya and the other families she had defrauded. The mansion on Beacon Hill, where Emma and Nathan had spent 3 months, would probably be sold to cover legal fees and damages. But for Maya, the most important outcome had already been achieved. Emma and Nathan were home, sleeping in their own beds and waking up to their mother's face every morning. They were attending their neighborhood school, playing with friends who had missed them, and slowly recovering from the psychological manipulation they had endured. 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Maya sat in her small backyard watching Emma and Nathan play with the neighborhood children who had become their close friends again. Emma was teaching a younger girl how to braid friendship bracelets, while Nathan was engaged in an elaborate superhero game that involved considerable running and shouting. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim. Victoria pled guilty to all charges, sentencing next month, probably looking at 4 years in prison. Maya felt a sense of closure reading the message, understanding that Victoria's admission of guilt validated everything Maya had endured and fought to prove. Dr. Martinez had reported significant progress in Emma and Nathan's therapy sessions. The children were beginning to understand that Victoria's manipulation hadn't been their fault and that their mother's love for them had never wavered. They were developing better boundaries around discussions of material advantages and learning to appreciate the emotional security that came from living with someone who prioritized their well-being over appearances.
David had been granted supervised visitation rights after completing a court-ordered program about recognizing and preventing parental alienation. His relationship with Emma and Nathan was slowly improving as he learned to interact with them without Victoria's interference or influence. Maya remained cautious about David's commitment to change, but she was willing to give him opportunities to prove he could be the father their children deserved. As evening approached and the other children were called inside for dinner, Emma and Nathan helped Maya gather their toys and prepare to go inside. The simple routine of ending a day of play and moving toward homework, dinner, and bedtime felt precious in its ordinariness after everything their family had survived. "Mom," Emma said as they climbed the stairs to their apartment, "Jessica's mom asked if I could come to her birthday party next weekend. Can I go?" Maya smiled at the normalcy of Emma's request, the return to childhood concerns about birthday parties and sleepovers, rather than adult complexities about custody and fraud. "Of course you can go, sweetheart. We'll get her a nice present." Nathan tugged on Maya's hand as they reached their door. "Mom, are we going to live here forever now? No one is going to make us move again?" Maya knelt down to Nathan's eye level and looked into his serious brown eyes. "Nathan, this is our home, and we're going to live here as long as we want to. No one is ever going to take you and Emma away from me again. I promise." As they entered their apartment, Maya felt the profound satisfaction of a promise she knew she could keep. Victoria's elaborate fraud had been exposed and punished, the legal system had corrected its mistakes, and, most importantly, Emma and Nathan understood that their mother's love was unshakable and permanent. The story that had begun with betrayal and manipulation was ending with justice and healing. Victoria Pemberton's attempt to steal Maya's children had ultimately strengthened their family bonds and demonstrated that truth, even when buried under layers of sophisticated deception, eventually finds a way to surface. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.